lockbox mechanisms, which are much favoured by sellers, came in, or first started being used around 6 or 7 years ago. They're much loved by private equity sellers because they avoid the need for any completion accounts mechanism, which is by definition an adjustment of the price. Private equity sellers are looking to do the deal, get out and distribute the proceeds to their investors. And therefore it was a very neat device by which you effectively bought and sold companies based on a prior balance sheet and then controlled the activity through contractual provisions between the time of the lockbox date, which is typically a few months before closing, and the period of closing. And what we've seen is increasingly the trade sellers also adopt that process because when they're in sale mode, it suits them to do that. And like many things which begin to emerge in particular areas of the practice, like private equity, it begins to grow through other territories. And we've seen that a lot across the continent of Europe. Germany was quite familiar with it, but the particular feature of 2012 was that it's being used much more in Benelux and Central and Eastern Europe and the UK than it had been hitherto. So I think it's very much here to stay. Well, I think that the whole W&I industry has certainly got its act into gear in terms of promoting the product and getting it used. There used to be a degree of cynicism about the effectiveness of the product, i.e. whether it would pay out when it was most needed, like any insurance product. The industry has worked quite hard at showing that they will pay out, and therefore it is a product worth having. The other aspect of it is that premiums have come down. Many of private equity sales in particular are pre-packaged to have a warranty and indemnity insurance entered into by the successful purchaser, and it's a matter of negotiation as to where the premium is borne in terms of the price. The providers of insurance have become much more user-friendly, not just in terms of price, but also in understanding the dynamics of transactions. And most lawyers and other practitioners are familiar with the documentation that needs to be put in place. I did a transaction earlier this year where we were able to do it and document it within 2 or 3 days, and that was unthinkable a few years ago. So that, the combination of more providers, more buy-in to the product, not just in UK, Europe, but also across the world, increasingly in the United States and in Australasia, has made this a product which is now part of the process and part of the landscape rather than the rarity it used to be. Yes, I mean there continue to be significant differences between US practice and European practice, and a number of examples would be the fact that liability caps in the US have always been traditionally much lower. Typically there's an escrow account or a holdback which is used in American deals, which is quite often the only pot available for warranty claims. Also, working capital adjustments are part of the furniture there. So 77% of cases, according to the American Bar Association, have working capital adjustments. So you get less lockbox type arrangements and more working capital adjustments. Other differences are the lack of material adverse change clauses in split signing and closing deals in Europe. They do exist, but they're normally specifically negotiated for particular circumstances. Compare that with the US, where there virtually always be a MAC clause, either through the warranties or through some other provision. And therefore, where you get a European mindset on those sort of issues against a US listed corporation who expects something else, you quite often have a clash of cultures. Other differences are the proliferation of earnouts. Much more likely to be an earn-out arrangement in a US deal. Again, our study reveals 38% of deals in the US have an earn-out element compared to 16% in Europe. So there's a lot of energy spent in the US on further consideration, i.e. the proof of the pudding, which the purchaser may be prepared to pay to the seller by way of further consideration if the target turns out to be successful in the purchaser's hands.